The gun was 3 feet away from his daughter's face, but David Mitchell didn't flinch. His hand stayed steady on 7-year-old Emma's shoulder as the masked man screamed demands at the convenience store clerk. While other customers dropped to the floor or backed toward the exit, David simply shifted slightly, positioning himself between the weapon and his child. Emma looked up at him with wide eyes, but his calm expression never wavered. He whispered something so soft that only she could hear, and remarkably, she smiled. In the far corner of the store, a woman in an expensive business suit watched this exchange with growing fascination. She had seen people react to crisis before, but never like this. What she was witnessing would change everything. David Mitchell had perfected the art of making mornings feel normal, even when nothing in his life felt that way anymore. At 6:15 a.m., he stood in his small kitchen, measuring coffee grounds with the same precision he once used in his former job as an aerospace engineer. The apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of their old refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic beginning to build on Highway 41. Emma's backpack sat by the door, already packed with her homework, a slightly bruised apple, and a peanut butter sandwich cut into triangles because that's how her mother used to do it. Sarah had been gone for 8 months now, taken by a drunk driver on a rainy Tuesday evening, but David maintained every small ritual that had made their daughter feel secure. The triangular sandwiches, the bedtime stories, the way he always checked twice that her seatbelt was properly fastened. He moved through their small living space with quiet efficiency, straightening throw pillows and gathering Emma's scattered art supplies from the coffee table. Their apartment wasn't much to look at, a modest 2-bedroom unit in a complex that had seen better decades, but it was clean and filled with Emma's artwork. Her drawings covered the refrigerator and most of one kitchen wall, colorful crayon masterpieces featuring stick figure families and houses with too many windows. "Daddy, I can't find Mr. Buttons," Emma called from her bedroom, and David smiled despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones these days. Mr. Buttons was a small brown teddy bear that had been Emma's constant companion since she was 3. It had survived countless tea parties, camping trips in their living room fort, and the terrible night when he'd had to explain that Mommy wasn't coming home. "Check under your bed, sweetheart. He likes to hide there sometimes." David's voice carried the patient warmth that came naturally when he spoke to his daughter. With everyone else, he had grown quieter since Sarah's death, more reserved. But with Emma, he could still find pieces of the man he used to be. The morning routine continued in comfortable rhythm. Emma appeared in the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying Mr. Buttons, who had indeed been discovered under her bed. She climbed onto her usual stool at their small breakfast counter and began eating cereal while chattering about her upcoming school presentation on butterflies. David listened while packing their lunches, offering appropriate responses and gentle encouragement. Emma had inherited Sarah's enthusiasm for learning and her ability to find wonder in small things. Watching his daughter navigate the world with such curiosity and resilience filled David with a mixture of pride and protective fierceness that sometimes surprised him with its intensity. They left the apartment at 7:45, walking hand in hand toward Emma's elementary school 6 blocks away. David had sold his car 3 months after Sarah died, partly for financial reasons and partly because driving had become difficult. Too many memories lived in those moments behind the wheel, too many echoes of family road trips and Sunday afternoon drives to nowhere in particular. The walk to school had become their special time together. Emma would point out interesting clouds or flowers growing in sidewalk cracks, and David would tell her stories about the buildings they passed or the different types of birds they occasionally spotted. Today she was particularly excited about a butterfly garden her class was planning to create, and she peppered him with questions about metamorphosis and migration patterns that stretched the limits of his knowledge. After dropping Emma at school with their usual goodbye ritual, 3 quick hugs and a promise to hear all about her day at dinner, David made his way toward the small convenience store where he worked part-time. The job didn't pay much, but it allowed him flexibility to pick Emma up after school and be present for the important moments in her life. His former career in aerospace engineering felt like something from another lifetime, before everything changed and priorities shifted in ways he never could have imagined. The store was located in a part of town that was slowly transitioning from its industrial past towards something more commercial, though the transformation was happening in fits and starts. Old warehouses stood next to newer strip malls, and the clientele reflected this mixed neighborhood character. David knew most of the regular customers by name, from the construction workers who stopped for coffee before dawn to the elderly woman who came in every afternoon for a lottery ticket and a brief conversation. As he unlocked the store and turned on the lights, David felt the familiar comfort of routine settling around him. This wasn't the life he had planned, but it was the life he had built, one careful day at a time. In a few hours, he would walk back to Emma's school, and they would spend the evening together doing homework and sharing stories about their respective days. It was simple and predictable and safe, everything he needed it to be. The morning customers began arriving shortly after he opened, and David settled into the steady rhythm of working the register, restocking shelves, and maintaining the easy conversations that made people feel welcome. He took quiet satisfaction in running the store efficiently, in knowing where everything was located, and anticipating what regular customers would need before they asked. It was during the 11 o'clock lull, when business typically slowed until the lunch rush, that everything changed. The first sign that something was wrong came not from any dramatic entrance or obvious threat, but from the subtle shift in atmosphere that David had learned to recognize during his months working in retail. He was restocking the candy display near the front counter when he noticed a man in a dark, hooded sweatshirt lingering near the refrigerated drinks, picking up and putting down the same energy drink multiple times while glancing frequently toward the register. David's instincts, sharpened by months of single parenthood and the heightened awareness that came from being solely responsible for another person's safety, began to whisper warnings. The man's movements were too deliberate, too practiced, and his eyes held a kind of desperate focus that David recognized from his own reflection during the worst days after Sarah's death. Before he could fully process what his intuition was telling him, the bell above the door chimed again, and Emma bounded into the store with the kind of unbridled energy that only 7-year-olds possessed. "Daddy!" she called out, her voice bright with excitement. "Mrs. Henderson said we could visit your work, and she gave me permission to walk here by myself because I remembered all the street names perfectly." David's heart performed a complex dance of pride at his daughter's independence and terror at her presence in what his instincts were increasingly telling him was a potentially dangerous situation. Emma had been asking for weeks to see where he worked, and apparently her teacher had agreed to let her make the short walk during their lunch break as part of a lesson about community helpers. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," David said, moving toward her with casual speed. "But you should have called first to make sure it was a good time." Emma launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her morning at school, completely oblivious to the tension that David could feel building in the small store. The man in the hooded sweatshirt had moved closer to the counter, his hand now resting inside his front pocket in a way that made David's protective instincts flare into high alert. It was at this moment that the third player in what was about to unfold made her entrance. The woman was clearly out of place in this modest neighborhood store, wearing a tailored business suit that probably cost more than David made in 2 months, and carrying herself with the kind of confident authority that came from years of making important decisions. She moved toward the back of the store, ostensibly browsing the limited selection of prepared foods, but David noticed that she seemed more interested in observing the other customers than in making any purchases. Emma had claimed her favorite spot on the small stool that David kept behind the counter for slow periods, when she occasionally visited after school. She was chattering happily about butterflies and metamorphosis while coloring in a small notebook, completely absorbed in her artistic endeavor and blissfully unaware of the adult tensions swirling around her. The moment arrived with sudden, violent clarity. The hooded man approached the counter with quick, decisive steps, his right hand emerging from his pocket to reveal a small black pistol that he pointed directly at David's chest. "Open the register," he demanded in a voice that shook slightly with adrenaline or desperation. "All the cash right now. No alarms, no stupid moves." David's world contracted to a series of crystalline observations. The gun was real but old, possibly a small-caliber revolver that had seen better decades. The man holding it was young, probably early 20s, with the gaunt look of someone who hadn't been eating regularly. His hands trembled slightly, suggesting this wasn't a practiced routine, but rather an act of desperation. Most importantly, Emma was approximately 3 feet away from the weapon, still coloring and initially unaware of what was happening around her. David's response came not from training or preparation, but from the deep well of protective instinct that had governed every decision he'd made since becoming Emma's sole guardian. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and calm, pitched low enough to avoid alarming his daughter, while still being clearly audible to their unwelcome visitor. "I understand you need money," David said, his hands moving slowly and visibly toward the register. "I'm going to open this for you right now. There's probably about $200 in here, maybe a little more. You can have all of it." Emma looked up from her coloring book, finally noticing the stranger with the gun. David watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been fear. This was the moment that would define everything that happened next. Instead of screaming or panicking, David made a choice that would later be dissected and analyzed by countless viewers of a video that didn't yet exist. He placed his left hand gently on Emma's shoulder, maintaining the physical connection that had anchored both of them through 8 months of grief and adjustment, and spoke to her in the same voice he used for bedtime stories and morning reassurances. "Emma, sweetheart, this gentleman needs some help, and we're going to help him. Remember what we talked about, how sometimes grown-ups have problems that make them scared, just like kids do? This is one of those times. I need you to stay right here with me, and keep being brave, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly, her young mind processing this explanation with the remarkable adaptability of childhood. She didn't fully understand the situation, but she understood that her father was calm and that he was handling whatever was happening. That was enough. The robber, who had probably expected screaming or panic or desperate resistance, found himself facing something entirely unexpected. A man who was treating this desperate act with the same patient competence he brought to every other challenge in his carefully ordered life. What happened next unfolded with a strange, suspended quality that would later make the security footage seem almost surreal to viewers. David continued speaking to the young man with the gun in the same measured, respectful tone he might use with a distressed customer or a confused neighbor. "What's your name?" David asked as he opened the register drawer, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. The question clearly caught the robber off guard. "What? Why do you want to know my name?" "Because you're a person, and persons have names. I'm David, and this is my daughter Emma. She's 7, and today is actually her first time visiting me at work." David began removing bills from the register, counting them openly and setting them on the counter in neat stacks. "Are you hurt? You look like you might be hurt." The young man, and David could see now that he was very young, probably not much older than 20, seemed increasingly agitated by this conversational approach to what should have been a straightforward criminal transaction. "Just give me the money, man. I don't want to talk." "Of course," David replied calmly. "I'm getting it for you right now, but I noticed you're favoring your left side a little bit, and your color doesn't look good. When's the last time you had something to eat?" Emma, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for her favorite television shows, suddenly spoke up. "Are you sick?" she asked the robber with genuine concern. "My daddy knows about being sick because he took care of me when I had the flu last month. The weapon wavered slightly in the young man's grip. This wasn't going according to any plan he might have had. "I'm not sick, kid. I need money." "For medicine?" Emma asked with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Sometimes medicine costs a lot. My mum needed expensive medicine before she went to heaven." The robber's face underwent a visible transformation at Emma's matter-of-fact reference to her mother's death. David watched the young man struggle with emotions that were clearly too complex for the simple act of theft he'd intended to commit. "Something like that," the robber said quietly. David had finished counting the cash from the register. "There's $237 here," he said, sliding the money toward the young man. "That's everything from the register. But before you go, I want you to know that there's a community health clinic about 6 blocks from here on Maple Street. They do sliding scale payments, and they don't ask questions about insurance or ability to pay. If you're sick, or if someone you care about is sick, they'll help." The woman in the expensive business suit, who had remained motionless near the back of the store throughout this entire exchange, was now staring at David and Emma with an expression that was difficult to read. She had her phone in her hand, but rather than calling for help, she appeared to be recording what was happening. The robber reached for the money with his free hand, but his movements had lost their earlier urgency. "Why are you being nice to me?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice carried more confusion than threat. "Because you're obviously in trouble, and I know what that feels like," David replied. "And because my daughter is watching, and I want her to see that even in scary situations, we can choose to treat each other with respect." Emma nodded seriously. "Daddy says that being kind is always the right choice, even when it's hard." The young man looked between David and Emma, his resolve clearly wavering. The gun had dropped to his side, though he still held it. "I don't want to hurt anybody. My little sister needs surgery, and we don't have insurance. And I lost my job last month." David felt a familiar ache in his chest, the recognition of someone else's desperation, and the desire to help even when his own resources were limited. "How old is your sister?" 5. She was born with a heart defect, and it's getting worse. The doctors say she needs an operation soon, or—" The young man's voice broke slightly. Emma climbed down from her stool and, before David could stop her, walked around the counter toward the robber. Both men watched in amazement as this small girl approached her armed stranger with complete fearlessness. "I'm sorry your sister is sick," Emma said solemnly. "When my mom was sick, I used to draw her pictures to make her feel better. Would she like a picture?" Emma held up her coloring book, showing a drawing of butterflies surrounded by flowers. "I was learning about butterflies today. Did you know they start as caterpillars and then they change into something completely different? My teacher says it's called metamorphosis." The robber stared down at Emma, and David watched something fundamental shift in the young man's expression. The desperate hardness that had driven him to point a gun at strangers began to crumble, replaced by something that looked like wonder at this child's simple offer of kindness. She would love a picture," the robber said quietly, his voice thick with emotions he was clearly struggling to control. Emma carefully tore the butterfly page from her coloring book and held it up to the young man. "Here, tell her that Emma said butterflies are proof that beautiful things can happen even when everything seems scary." The robber took the drawing with his free hand, staring at it as if it were something miraculous. The gun dangled forgotten at his side as he processed this unexpected act of generosity from the child he had inadvertently terrorized. David watched this exchange with a mixture of pride in his daughter's compassionate nature and concern for her safety. But he could see that something essential had changed in this young man, that Emma's simple gesture had accomplished what no amount of reasoning or pleading might have achieved. The businesswoman had moved closer, her phone now openly recording the scene. David noticed her for the first time in several minutes and felt a flicker of unease about being filmed during such a private moment of crisis and connection. "I can't take your money," the robber said suddenly, setting the bills back on the counter. "This isn't... I'm not this person." "You can take it," David said gently. "But maybe there's a better way to help your sister. Have you tried the Children's Hospital Foundation? Sometimes they have programs for families who need financial assistance." The young man looked up from Emma's drawing, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I didn't know about anything like that. I was desperate, and I thought maybe if I could get some quick cash." "Desperation makes us consider things we wouldn't normally consider," David said. "I understand that completely. But there are people who want to help families in your situation. You don't have to do this alone." Emma had returned to her father's side, slipping her small hand into his with the natural ease of a child who trusted completely in her parents' ability to handle any situation. The robber noticed this gesture and seemed to find something significant in the obvious bond between father and daughter. "You two remind me of me and my sister," he said quietly. "After our parents died, it's just been us. I've been trying to take care of her, but everything is so expensive, and I don't know how to navigate all the medical stuff." David felt the familiar tug of wanting to help, even though his own resources were stretched thin. "What's your sister's name?" "Lucy. Lucy Martinez." "Well, Lucy is lucky to have a big brother who cares so much about her," David said. "But she's also going to need you around for a long time, which means you can't do things that might land you in jail or worse." The robber, who was clearly just a scared young man trying to save someone he loved, nodded slowly. "I know. I didn't know what else to do." Emma tugged on David's shirt sleeve. "Daddy, can we help them find the hospital people? The ones who help sick kids?" David smiled at his daughter's immediate desire to solve this new problem that had entered their lives. "We can try, sweetheart. There are definitely people who specialize in helping families navigate medical expenses." The young man looked between David and Emma with an expression that contained elements of gratitude, shame, and something that might have been hope. "I should go," he said, tucking the gun back into his sweatshirt pocket. "I'm sorry I scared you. Both of you." "You don't have to apologize to me," Emma said with the straightforward honesty of childhood. "You were just worried about your sister. That's what people do when they love someone." It was this moment, a 7-year-old child offering understanding and forgiveness to someone who had threatened her and her father, that would later move millions of viewers to tears. But in the immediate present, it was simply Emma being Emma, extending the same generous spirit that had helped her and David navigate their own losses and challenges. The robber carefully folded Emma's butterfly drawing and tucked it into his pocket along with the gun. "Thank you," he said, though it was unclear whether he was addressing David, Emma, or both of them. I'll look into those programs you mentioned." As he turned to leave, David made one final decision that would later be debated and praised in equal measure. "Wait," he called out. "If you give me your phone number, I can make some calls today and see what resources might be available for Lucy. I used to work in aerospace engineering, so I know how to research complex systems and cut through bureaucracy. Sometimes it just helps to have someone who knows how to ask the right questions." The young man stopped and turned back, his expression cycling through surprise, suspicion, and then cautious hope. "You would do that? After I pointed a gun at you and your daughter?" David shrugged with the practical matter-of-factness that had become his default approach to life's unexpected challenges. "You're a person who needs help, and helping people is what decent human beings do for each other. It's not complicated." "But I could have hurt you. I could have hurt her." "But you didn't," David replied simply. "And now you have a chance to get the help your sister needs without risking everything you both have left." The young man stood frozen for several seconds, clearly struggling with the concept that his act of desperation might somehow result in genuine assistance rather than punishment or judgment. Finally, he pulled out an old, cracked smartphone and recited his number while David entered it into his own phone. "I'm Michael," he said. "Michael Martinez." "Nice to meet you, Michael," David replied, as if they were encountering each other in completely normal circumstances. "I'll call you later today after I've had a chance to make some inquiries." Michael nodded and looked down at Emma one last time. "Thank you for the butterfly picture. I think Lucy is going to love it. Tell her I said butterflies prove that things can get better even when they seem impossible," Emma replied, with the wisdom that sometimes emerges from children who have faced their own impossibilities. After Michael left, the store fell into an odd silence. David realized that his hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up with him now that the immediate danger had passed. Emma climbed back onto her stool and resumed coloring as if nothing particularly unusual had happened. It was then that the well-dressed woman approached the counter, her phone still in her hand and her expression unreadable. "I recorded that entire interaction," she said without preamble. "I hope you don't mind, but I've never seen anything like what just happened here." David felt a familiar wariness settle over him. "I'd prefer if you didn't share that video. This was a private moment, and that young man is clearly dealing with enough without having his worst decision broadcast to the world." The woman studied David's face with the kind of intense attention that suggested she was accustomed to making quick but significant judgments about people. "What if I told you that sharing this video could help more families like his? What if it could raise awareness about the kind of medical financial assistance programs you mentioned, or inspire other people to respond to crisis situations with the same compassion you just showed?" David considered this, his protective instincts battling with his desire to help other families in desperate situations. "I suppose that would depend on how it was shared and what the focus was. I wouldn't want this to be about me or Emma. If it could genuinely help other people, then maybe—" "It could help a lot of people," the woman said with quiet conviction. "Trust me on this." She extended her hand to David. "I'm Catherine Wells, by the way, and I think you and Emma might have just changed more lives than you realize." David shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that suggested someone accustomed to command and authority, though he couldn't quite place where those qualities might come from. "David Mitchell, and this is Emma." Emma looked up from her coloring book and smiled at Catherine. "Hi. Do you want to see my butterfly? I gave the best one to Michael for his sister, but I have more." Catherine knelt down to Emma's eye level, her expensive suit incongruous in the modest convenience store setting. "I would love to see your butterfly," she said with genuine warmth. As Emma launched into an explanation of her artwork and her morning lessons about metamorphosis, David found himself wondering who Catherine Wells was and why she seemed so certain that their encounter with Michael could have broader implications. But those questions would have to wait. In a few minutes, he would need to walk Emma back to school, and this strange morning would join the collection of experiences that were gradually teaching both of them how to navigate an unpredictable world with grace and resilience. For now, it was enough that a dangerous situation had been resolved without harm, that a desperate young man had left with hope instead of money, and that Emma had once again demonstrated the kind of instinctive compassion that made David believe they were going to be okay, no matter what challenges lay ahead. What none of them could have predicted was how dramatically their lives were about to change, or how Emma's simple gift of a butterfly drawing was going to touch millions of hearts and spark a movement that would transform how people thought about crisis, compassion, and the unexpected connections that can emerge from our most difficult moments. The story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. Catherine Wells remained in the store long after Emma had returned to school and the afternoon customers had resumed their normal patterns of coming and going. She sat in the small plastic chair near the window, ostensibly reviewing emails on her phone, but actually watching David work with the kind of focused attention that had made her one of the most successful venture capitalists on the West Coast. Most people, Catherine had learned through 20 years of evaluating human potential for investment purposes, revealed their true character in moments of comfort and routine. But David Mitchell had just demonstrated something far more rare: authentic leadership under pressure, the kind of instinctive emotional intelligence that couldn't be taught or faked. She had come to this unremarkable neighborhood to meet with the owner of a small tech startup who was seeking funding for an app designed to help low-income families access healthcare resources. The meeting had been cancelled at the last moment, but Catherine had decided to grab lunch at a nearby restaurant rather than immediately return to her downtown office. The convenience store had been a quick stop for bottled water, nothing more. Instead, she had witnessed something that challenged every assumption she held about crisis leadership and human nature under stress. David was helping an elderly customer locate a specific type of pain reliever when Catherine finally approached the counter again. She waited patiently while he explained the differences between various over-the-counter medications with the same careful attention he had given to the armed young man who had threatened his daughter hours earlier. "Mr. Mitchell," Catherine said once the customer had left, "I'd like to talk with you about something important, if you have a few minutes." David looked up from the inventory sheet he had been updating. "If this is about the video, I meant what I said earlier. I don't want Michael's face or personal information shared. That young man has enough problems without becoming an internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. I understand your concern, and I agree completely. The video I took focuses primarily on you and Emma. Michael's face isn't clearly visible, and there's nothing that would identify him specifically." Catherine paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But before we discuss the video, I think you should know who I am and why this matters." She handed David a business card that was elegantly simple. Catherine Wells, Managing Partner, Pinnacle Ventures. Below her name was a phone number and email address, nothing more. David studied the card with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what Pinnacle Ventures is." Catherine smiled at his honesty. In her world, people typically researched her extensively before any interaction, often arriving at meetings with detailed knowledge of her investment history and net worth. David's genuine unfamiliarity was refreshing. Pinnacle Ventures is an investment firm. We provide funding and strategic guidance to companies we believe can make a significant positive impact. I specialize in identifying exceptional leadership potential, particularly in people who might not fit traditional corporate molds. David set the business card on the counter between them. "I'm not sure what that has to do with me, Ms. Wells. I work part-time in a convenience store and spend the rest of my time taking care of my daughter. I'm not exactly corporate leadership material." "That's where you're wrong," Catherine said with quiet conviction. "What I witnessed here today was the most impressive display of crisis leadership I've seen in 20 years of evaluating human potential. You de-escalated a potentially deadly situation using nothing but empathy, respect, and genuine concern for another person's welfare. You protected your daughter while simultaneously helping a desperate young man find a better path forward. That's not just emotional intelligence, Mr. Mitchell. That's the kind of authentic leadership that can change organizations and communities." David looked skeptical. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have panicked or complied silently or tried to be a hero in ways that could have gotten someone hurt. You did something much more difficult. You saw the humanity in someone who was threatening you and responded to that humanity rather than to the threat itself. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed David the video she had recorded. The footage was remarkably clear, capturing not just the sequence of events, but the subtle emotional undercurrents that had transformed a robbery into an act of human connection. "I've shown this to 3 colleagues already, and their response was unanimous. They want to meet you." David watched himself on the small screen, seeing for the first time how he had appeared to an outside observer during those tense minutes. He was surprised by his own calmness, by the way he had maintained steady eye contact with Michael while keeping one protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "What kind of meeting?" he asked warily. "The kind that could change your life," Catherine replied. "I'm not talking about some corporate job that would take you away from Emma or force you to compromise your values. I'm talking about an opportunity to use your natural gifts on a larger scale to help other people and families while building financial security for you and your daughter." David remained silent, processing this unexpected offer while watching the video continue to play. He could see Emma's innocent interaction with Michael, her spontaneous gift of the butterfly drawing, the moment when a desperate young man had chosen hope over desperation. "People need to see this," Catherine continued. "Not for entertainment, and not to make you famous. They need to see it because it shows them what's possible when we choose compassion over fear. Your response to that situation could inspire thousands of other people to handle their own crises differently." "And you think showing this video could somehow lead to job opportunities for me?" Catherine nodded. "I think this video could lead to opportunities you haven't even imagined yet. But more importantly, I think you have gifts that are being wasted stocking shelves and working a register. You have the kind of natural leadership ability that could help build companies, transform communities, even influence policy at higher levels." David looked around the small store that had become his professional world for the past several months. It wasn't glamorous work, but it had provided stability during a period when stability was exactly what he and Emma needed. The idea of stepping into something larger and more uncertain felt both appealing and terrifying. "What would this mean for Emma?" he asked. "She's been through enough upheaval already. I won't do anything that disrupts her life or takes me away from her when she needs me. Emma would be a central consideration in any opportunity we discussed," Catherine assured him. "In fact, watching how she handled herself today suggests that she's inherited some of her father's remarkable composure and emotional intelligence. There are educational opportunities, enrichment programs, support systems that could benefit her tremendously." The bell above the door chimed, and Michael Martinez walked back into the store. He looked different now, less desperate and more hopeful, though still clearly nervous about returning to the scene of his attempted crime. "Mr. Mitchell?" Michael said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I wanted to thank you. And I wanted you to know that I went to that clinic you mentioned. They're going to help Lucy, and they connected me with some job training programs too." David smiled with genuine pleasure at this news. "That's wonderful, Michael. I'm so glad things are working out." Michael noticed Catherine and looked questioningly between the two adults. "I'm not interrupting anything important, am I?" "Not at all," Catherine said warmly. "Actually, your timing is perfect. Mr. Mitchell and I were just discussing how your story today demonstrates the power of choosing compassion over fear." Michael looked confused. "My story?" David explained about the video and Catherine's proposal, emphasizing again his concerns about Michael's privacy and dignity being protected. "You really think showing people what happened could help other families like mine?" Michael asked. "I think it could help in ways we haven't even considered yet," Catherine replied. "Your willingness to turn away from a destructive path when someone offered you genuine help and respect shows incredible strength of character. That's inspirational." Michael was quiet for several moments, clearly thinking through the implications. "If it could help other people find the resources they need without doing something stupid like I almost did, then I think you should share it. Just maybe don't make me look like a victim or a saint. I made a bad choice because I was scared, and then I made a better choice because someone treated me like a human being. That's all it was." Catherine felt a familiar excitement building, the recognition of a story that could resonate far beyond its immediate participants. That's exactly the message people need to hear. That we all make choices based on fear sometimes, but we can also make different choices when we're met with understanding instead of judgment. David watched this exchange with growing awareness that the morning's events had set something in motion that was much larger than his small personal world. The idea both thrilled and worried him. He had built his life around predictability and security since Sarah's death, around creating a safe space where he and Emma could heal and grow without unexpected disruptions. "I need to think about this," David said finally. "This is all happening very fast, and I have Emma to consider." Catherine nodded with understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll consider the possibility that your gifts could benefit far more people than just the customers of this store." She handed him a second business card. "My personal number is on the back. Call me when you're ready to talk more seriously about what opportunities might be available." As Catherine prepared to leave, she turned back to address both men. "I want you both to know that what happened here today restored my faith in human nature. In my business, I see a lot of people who are motivated primarily by self-interest and profit. Meeting people who prioritize compassion and human dignity reminds me why I do this work." After she left, Michael and David stood together in comfortable silence for a few moments, processing the unexpected turn their lives had taken. "Do you think she's right?" Michael asked. "About this helping other people?" David considered the question seriously. "I think she's right, that people need to see examples of choosing compassion over fear. Whether sharing our story is the right way to do that, I'm not sure yet." Michael nodded. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you did today probably saved Lucy's life. And maybe mine, too. I was heading down a path that wouldn't have ended well for either of us." "You saved yourself, Michael. I just pointed you toward resources that were already available. The choice to use them was yours." "Maybe. But you made it possible for me to see that there were other choices. That matters." As the afternoon shifted toward evening, and David prepared to close the store, he found himself thinking about Catherine's words and the possibility that his life might be about to change in fundamental ways. The stability he had worked so hard to create for Emma felt suddenly fragile. But perhaps that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it was time to consider that there might be ways to build security and meaning that didn't require limiting his world to the boundaries of their small neighborhood. Maybe Emma deserved to see her father using his full potential, not just surviving, but thriving and contributing to something larger than their immediate needs. The questions would have to wait until after dinner and homework and bedtime stories. But for the first time in months, David found himself imagining a future that held possibilities beyond simple endurance. The video went live on Catherine's personal social media accounts at 7 o'clock the following evening, accompanied by a carefully crafted message about authentic leadership, compassion in crisis, and the power of treating people with dignity regardless of circumstances. She had spent the entire day editing the footage to protect Michael's identity, while preserving the emotional impact of the encounter. David knew nothing about the posting until his phone began ringing at 8:15, while he and Emma were reading together on their small couch. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Chen from Channel 7 News. We've seen a video that we believe features you and your daughter, and we'd love to speak with you about it." David politely declined the interview request and turned off his phone, but the calls continued throughout the evening on his landline. By 10 o'clock, he had received inquiries from 4 local news stations, 2 national morning shows, and something called a podcast network that wanted to discuss viral moments of human connection. Emma had fallen asleep against his shoulder during their reading session, and David carried her to bed while trying to process what was happening. Catherine had warned him that the video might receive attention, but he hadn't anticipated anything quite this immediate or intense. The next morning brought new complexities. As David walked Emma to school, several neighbors stopped him to mention seeing a video online that looked like it might feature him and Emma. Word had somehow spread through their small community that David Mitchell from the convenience store had become internet famous, though most people weren't sure exactly why. Emma handled the attention with typical 7-year-old adaptability, proudly telling anyone who would listen that she and her daddy had helped a sad man find resources for his sick sister. Her simple, matter-of-fact retelling of events somehow made the story seem even more remarkable. At the store, David discovered that the video had been viewed over 200,000 times in less than 24 hours. Catherine arrived mid-morning with printed screenshots of comments and messages from viewers around the world. "Listen to this," she said, scrolling through responses on her tablet. "This is from a woman in Seattle. I watched this video with my teenage son, and we talked for 2 hours about how to handle difficult situations with empathy instead of fear. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." She continued reading. From a teacher in Chicago. "I'm showing this to my high school students as an example of emotional intelligence in action. The way this father maintained calm while protecting his daughter and helping someone in crisis should be taught in leadership classes." David listened to these responses with a mixture of pride and discomfort. He had never sought public attention, and the idea that his private moment of crisis was being analyzed and discussed by strangers felt invasive despite the positive reactions. "Here's one that I think you'll find particularly interesting," Catherine continued. "It's from the CEO of a major healthcare foundation. He wants to know if you'd be willing to consult with them on developing better crisis intervention protocols for their emergency assistance programs." "Consult about what? I don't know anything about healthcare administration or emergency protocols." "You know about human behavior under pressure. You know how to de-escalate tension and create connection even in threatening situations. Those are rare and valuable skills that could be applied in many different contexts." Over the following days, the opportunities multiplied in ways that seemed almost surreal to David. A crisis management firm in New York wanted to fly him out to discuss joining their team as a specialist in hostage negotiation scenarios. A university psychology department invited him to speak at a conference on trauma-informed leadership approaches. 3 different book agents contacted him about writing a memoir focused on single parenting and community resilience. Most surprisingly, Michael called on Thursday afternoon to report that his story had somehow become part of the viral narrative, though his identity remained protected. Several medical foundations had reached out through intermediaries to offer assistance with Lucy's surgery, and he had been accepted into a job training program that would help him develop skills in medical equipment technology. "People are saying that our story proves something important about choosing hope over desperation," Michael told David. "I never thought my worst moment could somehow turn into something that helped other people." Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity at her elementary school. Her teacher reported that Emma's classmates were fascinated by her role in the butterfly video, as it had become known, and several parents had asked if Emma might be willing to talk to their children about staying calm during scary situations. "I don't understand why everyone thinks what we did was so special," Emma confided to David one evening. "We were just being nice to someone who needed help. Isn't that what people are supposed to do?" Her innocent question crystallized something David had been struggling to articulate about the overwhelming response to their story. Emma was right that their actions had been instinctive and natural, driven by basic human decency rather than any calculated heroism. The fact that such ordinary compassion had been received as extraordinary said something troubling about how rarely people witnessed or practiced genuine empathy in crisis situations. Catherine visited the store again on Friday, bringing news of what she called the most significant opportunity yet. "I've been contacted by the Ford Foundation," she said. "They're launching a new initiative focused on community-based crisis intervention, and they want you to help design and implement pilot programs in underserved neighborhoods across the country." David set down the inventory clipboard he had been holding. "Catherine, I appreciate everything you've done, but I think you're overestimating my qualifications. I'm not a social worker or a community organizer. I'm just a father who tried to handle a difficult situation without making it worse." "That's exactly why you're qualified," Catherine replied. "You have something that can't be taught in graduate school: authentic emotional intelligence and the ability to see human dignity even in people who are behaving badly. The Ford Foundation doesn't need another credentialed expert. They need someone who understands how to build trust and connection in real-world crisis situations." She pulled out a folder containing detailed information about the proposed position. The salary alone was more than David had earned in his previous engineering job, with benefits that would provide Emma with educational opportunities he had never dreamed possible. "The position would be based here locally," Catherine continued, "but it would involve travel to other communities to help establish similar programs. Emma would have access to exceptional schools, enrichment programs, and support systems. You'd be doing work that could prevent thousands of other families from reaching the kind of desperation that drove Michael to consider armed robbery." David studied the documents with growing amazement. The scope of the proposed work was intimidating, but it also felt like a natural extension of the approach he had instinctively taken with Michael. Instead of helping one person at a time in crisis situations, he would be helping to create systems that could reach many more people before they reached crisis points. "What about Emma?" he asked. "This kind of work would mean less predictable schedules, more demands on my time and attention." "Emma would be part of it," Catherine said. "Not directly involved in the work itself, but her perspective and experiences would be valuable. The Foundation is particularly interested in programs that help children develop resilience and emotional intelligence. Emma's natural compassion and wisdom could contribute to those efforts." That evening, David sat Emma down for a serious conversation about their future. He explained the opportunities that had emerged from their encounter with Michael and asked for her thoughts about potentially making significant changes to their quiet, predictable life. Emma listened with the focused attention she typically reserved for bedtime stories, asking occasional questions about what different kinds of work would mean and whether they would have to move away from their neighborhood. "Would we still be helping people like Michael?" she asked finally. "Yes, but in different ways. Instead of helping one person at a time when they're already in trouble, we'd be working to help lots of people before they get into trouble." Emma considered this carefully. "That sounds like it would prevent more butterflies from getting hurt before they have a chance to change into something beautiful." Her metaphor was so perfectly apt that David felt his last reservations beginning to dissolve. Emma had an intuitive understanding of what this work could accomplish, and her enthusiasm for helping people on a larger scale reflected the same generous spirit that had led her to give Michael her butterfly drawing. "If we did this, it would mean some big changes," David warned. "New responsibilities, new challenges, maybe some travel to other places." "But we'd still be together." "Always. Nothing about any job would ever be more important than us being together." Emma nodded decisively. "Then I think we should do it. Michael and Lucy need our help, but probably lots of other people do too. If we can help more people, shouldn't we try?" Her simple logic settled the matter. David called Catherine that evening to accept the Ford Foundation position, with the understanding that Emma's well-being and their family stability would remain his highest priorities. 6 months later, David stood in front of a community center in Detroit, addressing a group of local police officers, social workers, healthcare providers, and community leaders about implementing trauma-informed crisis intervention protocols. Emma sat in the back of the room, coloring in a notebook, while occasionally looking up to smile encouragingly at her father. The pilot program they were launching represented everything David had learned about treating people with dignity during their most desperate moments. Instead of responding to crisis situations with force or judgment, the trained interventionists would approach each encounter with curiosity about the underlying needs driving problematic behavior. "The key principle," David explained to the assembled group, is that behavior is communication. When someone is acting out of desperation, they're trying to tell us something about what they need, even if they don't have the words or emotional regulation skills to express it directly. Our job is to listen to what they're really saying and help them find better ways to meet those needs. After his presentation, a young police officer approached with questions about how these techniques might apply to domestic violence calls and mental health crises. David found himself drawing on not just his experience with Michael, but on hundreds of similar interactions he'd had over the past months as he'd worked to develop and test the new protocols. The Ford Foundation position had evolved into something even more meaningful than Catherine had originally described. David was now consulting with organizations across the country, helping to create training programs that taught people how to respond to crisis with empathy and practical assistance, rather than fear and punishment. Emma had thrived in ways that surprised even David. The exceptional educational opportunities available through the foundation had challenged her intellectually, while her natural compassion made her a valuable contributor to the family resilience programs David helped design. She had become something of a junior consultant, offering insights about how children experience and process crisis situations. Michael Martinez had also become an unexpected part of their extended community. His sister Lucy had successfully undergone heart surgery and was now a healthy, active 6-year-old. Michael had completed his medical equipment training and was working at the same children's hospital where Lucy had been treated. He frequently spoke at David's training sessions about his experience as someone whose desperation had been met with understanding rather than punishment. The butterfly video, as it was still known online, had been viewed over 50 million times and had inspired similar programs in 12 countries. But for David, the most meaningful impact was measured in individual stories, families who had received assistance before reaching crisis points, police officers who had successfully de-escalated potentially violent encounters, community members who had learned to see struggling neighbors as people needing support rather than threats requiring elimination. Catherine Wells had become not just a professional collaborator, but a genuine friend. Her venture capital firm had provided seed funding for several community crisis intervention programs, and she regularly joined David and Emma for dinner when she was in town. She often marveled at how much their lives had changed since that morning in the convenience store. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life?" she asked David during one of these visits. David considered the question while watching Emma help Michael's sister Lucy with a butterfly garden they were planting in their new backyard. The house the Ford Foundation position had made possible was modest but comfortable, with space for Emma to pursue her various interests and for David to host the strategy meetings that had become a regular part of his work. "I miss some things about the predictability," David admitted. "But I don't miss feeling like I was wasting opportunities to make a difference. This work feels like what I'm supposed to be doing with my life." Emma looked up from her gardening and added her own perspective. "Daddy, remember what I said about butterflies? Sometimes you have to leave your old cocoon to become what you're supposed to be." Her wisdom, still delivered with the matter-of-fact clarity of childhood, captured something essential about their transformation. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their quiet morning had instead become the catalyst for discovering purposes and possibilities neither of them had imagined. That evening, after Catherine had returned to her hotel and Emma was asleep, David sat in his small home office reviewing plans for the next month's training sessions. On his desk was a framed copy of Emma's original butterfly drawing, the one she had given to Michael that first day. Michael had returned it to them after Lucy's surgery was successful, saying it belonged with the family who had first shown him that beautiful transformations were possible even in the most frightening circumstances. Next to the drawing was a photograph from their most recent community training session, showing David speaking to a group of crisis interventionists while Emma sat nearby, completely absorbed in creating a new artwork. The image captured something David had learned about leadership over the past months. That real influence came not from authority or expertise, but from the willingness to remain authentically human even under pressure. His phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Lucy wanted you and Emma to see her latest school picture. She's wearing the butterfly pin you gave her for her birthday. Thank you for everything you've made possible for our family." The attached photo showed a healthy, smiling little girl wearing a delicate butterfly pin on her school uniform. Looking at Lucy's bright expression, David felt the familiar sense of purpose that had driven him through the challenges and uncertainties of the past months. Tomorrow would bring new communities, new crisis situations, new opportunities to demonstrate that choosing compassion over fear could transform not just individual encounters, but entire systems of human interaction. The work was demanding and sometimes emotionally difficult, but it was also the most meaningful thing David had ever done. He turned off his computer and walked quietly to Emma's room to check on her before going to bed himself. She was sleeping peacefully, surrounded by art supplies and books about butterflies, community helpers, and faraway places they might visit for future training programs. Standing in her doorway, David reflected on how much their lives had changed since that morning, when a desperate young man with a gun had walked into their quiet world. The crisis that had threatened everything they held dear had instead become the beginning of a larger story about hope, transformation, and the unexpected ways that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep and smiled, perhaps dreaming about butterflies or new friends or the next family they would have the chance to help. David smiled too, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together with the same combination of courage, compassion, and practical wisdom that had carried them this far. The story that had begun with a moment of crisis had become something much larger, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over desperation. It was a story that was still being written, one day and one transformed life at a time. In the quiet darkness of Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of their shared journey toward purpose and meaning, David felt grateful for every unexpected turn that had brought them to this place. The butterfly effect of that single morning had created ripples that would continue spreading for years to come, touching lives and changing hearts in ways they might never fully know. But they would keep doing the work, keep choosing compassion, keep believing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, and offered hope for transformation. Because that, David had learned, was what real heroes did. They showed up, stayed present, and trusted that treating people with respect and kindness could create miracles that no amount of force or fear ever could. The story was complete, but the work would continue. And somewhere in the world, another desperate person would encounter someone who chose to see their humanity rather than their desperation, creating yet another chance for beautiful transformation in what had seemed like an impossible situation. That was the real message of the butterfly video. That metamorphosis was always possible, that crisis could become catalyst, and that the most ordinary moments of human decency could become extraordinary examples of hope for anyone willing to watch and learn and choose compassion over fear.